All right, welcome to another podcast from the Georgia Track and Field Cross Country Coaching Collective. I'm Andy Christie, and I'm joined today by Donnie Ellis from Harris County. Excited to have him at the state track meet. 5A and 7A were together, and I noticed just some amazing performances from Harris County, and so wanted to get Coach Ellis here on the podcast. He's in track, the distance coach for Harris County. Has been a community cross-country coach, but this fall is transitioning to the head coach position. Harris County, for those of you maybe unfamiliar with Harris County, it's located in the west central area of Georgia on the border with Alabama. And at the state track meet this spring, they were second in the state in 5A girls. And they were led distance-wise by sophomore Effie Ward, 32 and 1600 state champ. She ran 10:53 at state, but lowered that to 10:43 postseason. 5:03 in the 1600 at state, and second in 800 in 2:21. But they also had a nice supporting cast. They had freshman Melanie Anderson, 7th in 800 in 2:22, and then their 4x8 relay got second in 9:43. Last fall, Effie was third at state, and the team was sixth at state in cross country. So welcome, Coach Ellis, to the podcast.
Hey, thank you for having me on.
So the first question is just what got you into running or coaching?
Okay, so I ran in high school out in California, and ran in college, both junior college and at the university level. And then after college, I did some racing and what have you for a few years afterwards. And then I got busy with life. And then I joined the Army right after 9/11. And I kind of did a lot of running in the Army, but I kind of pulled away from the competitive running. But then my children, both Caden and Caleb Ellis, competed in GHSA in the last few years. And towards the end of my military career, I really wanted to help them kind of do well in cross country and track because they had kind of fallen in love with it as I did. So that kind of brought me back to trying to help them coach or help them do well. So I started relearning some of the coaching techniques and things to help them progress. And then that just kind of helped me move into Harris County as being a community coach and initially started out trying to help my boys do better. And my oldest son, Caden, graduated in 2019, and we moved right into the region with Stars Mill, which immediately said, wow, there's a real program. And I befriended Don Livingston and started asking him questions. And of course, he was really helpful in helping me get started coaching and what have you. And then my son, Caleb, graduated in 22. He was fifth at state, ran like about 9:15 for the 3200. And everyone thought I would quit after my boys graduated, but I just absolutely fell in love with Harris County and coaching. And the girls team was just starting to come along as my sons graduated. And I really fell in love with coaching girls as well. So, the rest is history, so to speak. Here I am still coaching years after my son graduated, just because I absolutely love coaching and seeing the kids grow. I've befriended several coaches throughout Georgia and out of state that have just given me a ton of advice to keep going.
Awesome. So you kind of touched on this a little bit, but how do you feel like the program has evolved since you've been there?
Yeah, so I showed up in 2018 to help Mindy Johnson, who's now the athletic director at Harris County. She was the cross country coach, and I offered to help her out with some summer practices and what have you. And we literally maybe had 2 or 3 kids at summer practice. And honestly, this year, we have somewhere between 25 and 30 kids showing up at 6:30 in the morning, from, all levels, kids that have never ran before to, our girls who we're going to try to give pace or run for their money at cross country this fall, with the changing of, with classifications, the girls are excited about it. The boys are excited too. It's like making GHSA more competitive. But, I just really think it's really made the minds of the athletes and a couple other coaches that have now joined Um, just really try to build the program, and you can tell by the numbers that we have showing up. So where 4 or 5 years ago we maybe have 10 kids at practice, and now we have at least 25, and that's boys and girls mix every morning. So that tells you right there that, wow, people are starting to become interested in running cross country, having showing up in the summer.
So that brings up a good point of, let's say there's a coach watching this that has had the lower numbers. What are some of the things y'all did to you build excitement in the building to get more kids out?
Yeah, I will tell you, my experience has been, it's taken a while. And I think it really comes down to, once you start to achieve success, such as the girls placing second at state in track, and the girls placed sixth at cross country as a team 2 years in a row. The boys team a couple years ago were fifth at state. Some individuals scoring in the top five at cross country. People have started to notice, wow, that cross country team is doing fairly well. So that kind of sparked some interest. I think one of the things I do as well is every Tuesday night in the summer, we hold this community 5K. It's free, but I organize it. And this way, there's people that come out, have no idea about the cross country program for whatever reason. They've either missed it through school bulletins or Facebook, social media. Hey, we're practicing in the summer. There might be a new family that moves in, doesn't have any clue, but I start holding these free 5Ks on Tuesday night. All of a sudden, families just start showing up. It's like, oh, you're the cross country coach, and then now you get onesie twosies every couple of weeks, and then now all of a sudden, you got some kids just showing up. So I think it's a combination of getting involved in the recreation program. So we have a recreation program. I'll show my face. Some of me and my athletes will just volunteer to help run some of their meets. So we get to know some of the parents in the younger ages. And so then they start like, oh, I want to run with the high school in a couple years. I know who they are. So I think communication is one of the biggest things. And then um, just being consistent. Luckily for me, this last year or so, I have a couple coaches now that want to come out at 6:30 in the morning. And it's hard work. You know, these are teachers that work really hard year round, want their summers to themselves, and now they got to be at practice at 6:30 in the morning. I've been very blessed to have a coach that joined from one of the elementary schools. She's an avid runner, and in fact, she's running practice right now at 6:30 in the morning. So she's keeping it going, so I can take a break with my family, and then next week she takes a break with her family, but I can still hold those practices for the kids that are still up there. So communication, trying to get the word out that your program is practicing. And then I got to give this one to the kids. Their hard work and their success makes other kids want to join them.
I love that 5K idea. I've never heard of a program doing that, and that is really good idea because you're, like you said, you're getting the community involved. You're promoting fitness, which is great, but then also, yeah, people are seeing you out there, seeing the interest, uh, bringing their kids, and getting everybody kind of a community push towards running, which
Yeah.
sounds it's really paid off.
And I'll add one little caveat to it. So for us as a team, we treat that 5K kind of like a threshold. We don't
Right.
really race it every Tuesday, which allows the cross country kids to be in a less kind of competitive atmosphere. They're more like, hey, we're just showing up to run, kind of. And this way it doesn't scare the new runners off too much, So
Yeah.
they're like, hey, why don't you just try to run with me or what have you? So it tends to be, and it's usually pretty hot. That's our one workout a week that I like to do some heat acclimation. They're only out there for maybe 30 minutes or so pushing it, because all of our other workouts are in the morning to try to beat the heat. But I've learned in the past, if we do all of our workouts in the morning, and then when the school season comes, all of our workouts are in the afternoon after school, and the kids are they're trying to climatize that first 3 weeks or so, and it can be rough.
Yeah. Um, Now, what about the terrain around your in Harris County? Like, where are you guys able to train? Like, what are we talking with sidewalks? Are we talking trails? What kind of access do you have to running places?
Yeah, so I really try to mix it up a couple times a week. We try to get on we have a trail that was just built. They call it the Man of War Trail. It's part of one of those Rails to Trails program.
Mhm.
we literally have just got that built in the last 2 years. So, and it runs right through the center of Hamilton, which is where Harris County is located, just north of Columbus. So that's about a 13-mile trail, and it's got some rolling hills into it, which is really great. But most of our practices, we hold it at our soccer complex. So, there's probably about 10 or so soccer fields. So as you can imagine, I make loops around the grass and so forth. And there happens to be a couple access roads for maintenance and what have you that has some dirt trails, kind of rocky dirt. So we use those trails, and the kids don't like it too much, most of them, but some of them really dig in. But we have a nice, like, long gradual hill that's on one of those access trails. I love that hill because it's probably 350 meters long, so we could break it up and use different parts of that hill and that trail. So I really try to mix it up. We'll spend at least, doing our strides and some of our longer, we don't really do intervals, but we stretch them out in the grass a little bit. But by the end of July, we'll start getting into some intervals on the grass. But definitely warm-ups and cool downs before thresholds are in the grass. Try to send them up and down the hills as much as possible. On Mondays, we really do try to an ideal workout that I like to do on Monday after they take Sunday off is, they'll hit the trail for a 2-mile loop. We usually add 1 or 2 hills per week. So we started out with like 6 150s up the hill, and then they can kind of walk, jog, depending on their fitness, back down. And so I think this last week we're up to probably 10 hill, because we've been doing summer practice for about 3 weeks now. So I add about 2 a week, and we'll probably get up to about 12 hill repeats. And those hill repeats in the beginning of the summer are probably at like 5K pace. They're not really cranking them, but the hill jumps on them enough to does the work for them. So yeah, we try to mix it up between the trails, the dirt trails, the grass, hill repeats, and then getting out on the rails to trail for probably our long run. So shoes really matter when we get out on those long runs. I try to get them out of the speed shoes. I don't want them wearing the Vaporflies and the Adidas high-end shoes and what have you. It's like, just get the good old-fashioned trainers, a new pair of trainers, and you'll be fine out on those on the concrete trails and so forth. But it's generally, we spend most of our time right around Hamilton soccer complex, or the rails to trails are our normal routes.
Nice. Sounds like you have some good options, which is helpful for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What is it about cross country and distance that you love coaching?
Of course, it's always exciting when you get a sprinter who comes out and he's or she is just fast. You can really appreciate that explosiveness, and you're like, wow, that's amazing to watch that kid. But I really love getting this gangly bobblehead freshman that shows up who just has no athletic ability. You throw him a football and he can't catch it and what have you, but then he buys into your program, and then, like, he goes from this 5'2", 108-pound freshman, and then all of a sudden he grows to be taller than you, and then he gains all this confidence that, putting in those miles, and then he starts to build his identity as this kid who can run for an hour at 7:30 pace or whatever it is. And then all of a sudden he's ranking in the top 10 in region, and then he's ranking in the top 30 at state, even if they're not, competing for state championship. I just think that confidence they build from something they did, because nobody can do the work for you. You have to commit and do the work. And then I've been fortunate enough to been around the program long enough to see a couple classes come in as freshmen and leave as seniors, and what they carry with them onto college. Even if they don't run after college, they just now know, hey, if I put my mind to it, I can really set an accomplishment. And one of the things I love about cross country is you have to plan those workouts out. You have to be disciplined to be like, hey, I got to get up in the morning and do this in the summer when all my friends are sleeping. After school, I could just go home and take a nap and then do my homework, but instead I'm doing 2.5 hours of, whether it's warm-ups, cool downs, workout, maybe weights, stretching. And it's 2.5 hours later before you even get home. I just really think these kids have built up quite a bit of confidence in themselves and a lot of personal discipline, which I always tell them all the time. You have now become the most desirable employees of most businesses, because if you can do that stuff as a high schooler, you're going to have the discipline and to go to work every day at 6:30 and commit and build a plan, which everybody knows there's a lot of planning that goes involved with being a good distance runner. I tell the kids all the time, nobody's going to come out of your biology class that never ran before and come beat the average kids on the cross country team. Because if you didn't run in the summer, there's a really good chance you're not going to get a new kid come out in September and help you score points at state. That's just not going to happen. So I really love seeing that kid grow from just being this really small, timid young man or woman, and then just turn into this just like confident person, speaking so well and just going off to college or the workforce and just doing great things. I love it.
I can relate to that. Just and it's not always the top kids, like you said. It's the boy or girl that's trying to break 30 minutes and they run 29:58, and
Absolutely.
and it's amazing. It's such a fun celebration. And then I also have to laugh at what you said about throwing a football, because when we go to like our team camp and we're playing basketball and volleyball, we joke with each other about there's a reason that we're runners. We see some of the the performances.
Yeah,
um
absolutely.
yeah. um So Harris County, obviously not in the metro area. I wondered what your take is on being outside of that, the most populated area of the state, and having to travel maybe to a little more to some of the bigger meets, or to find competition, or to go to certain races. Just your experience as being outside the metro area.
Yeah. I mentioned, I got into Harris coaching at Harris County with my son, Caden, who just graduated from UGA, which I'm proud to say. You know, we came here from Arizona in 2018, and the cross country schedule, I go back and look at his mile split and look at that cross country schedule compared to where we are now. It's so drastically different. And he set all the school records when he first showed up. He's kind of a big fish in a little pond, so to speak. And, he's, like a 10:22 miler at the time, 4:30 for the mile, and so forth. And, but then we looked at Stars Mill and some of the other programs that were close by and saw the meets that they were going to. And me being new to Georgia, I was like, we got to go where some of these other schools are going just to see how we stand up. Because that initial schedule, we were doing, the local cross country race. They have a series in Muskogee County at Shaw High School at Connect Stadium. And then we'd go out to Marion. And those meets are fine when your team isn't that competitive. But once you start to become more competitive, you really got to go find those other schools. And we were looking at schools like Carrollton, Stars Mill, McIntosh, seeing the meets that they were going to. And immediately that just completely changes the mindset of your athletes. They're like, oh, yeah, that's that school that we saw. And, well, the fifth girl on that team beat our first girl. Like, we got to start trying to keep up with those kinds of schools. And, we saw the McIntosh girls at state this year. And Effie, she's been kind of seeing them, and she walked up to him. She's like, you need to know, like, Harris County's been trying to like make our school as good as yours, because their school has been so good on the girls' side for so long. And it just wasn't until this last year or so that our girls were able to compete with their girls. And, McIntosh's program and what Mike Johnson does there is exactly what Harris County wants to do. So we would see the schedules that those schools were doing. Like, we got to go where they go. We didn't go to ASICS until must have been 2020, maybe 2021 was the first time we went to ASICS. I'm like, wow, this is an amazing cross country meet. Why haven't we gone here before? So that was a learning experience for us to find those good meets. Of course, we started going to Stars Mill Invitational early on in the season, mainly because once we joined their region, when they used to be 5A, and now we're back in their region in 4A. But we're like, hey, the region meet is at Stars Mill. We got to go see their meet early on. And of course, that is a super competitive early season meet, kind of shows you where you're standing in GHSA. You always get some good Alabama schools like Auburn show up, and you see how you compare against their program. So, yeah, it's taken 5-6 years to figure out where the good meets are. As far as traveling, we pretty much find where we need to go within about an hour and a half. So it's an hour and a half one way. We can get to Carrollton in about 70 minutes, 75 minutes. So we definitely hit up the Carrollton meet. Stars Mill, A6 is kind of our normal routine. We like to do one meet a year now. The last couple of years we go out to Alabama and Huntsville and do the Southern Showcase in September, just because they run that the running lane cross country championships, which is, as long as it's not raining, is a good fast course.
Yeah.
And it's accurate. It's 5,000 meters, but it's fast. So it's a good way to finish the season and good competition. You get to see what kids from around the country, because there's always people from Arizona and Utah and Colorado at running lane who didn't make it to the Nike or the Foot Lockers. So it's only 4 hours away from us. So we love doing the running lane series when they have it. So
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think that's such a great thing for coaches to hear, of figure out where your program is, and maybe the smaller meets are good for your program at first, and then you progress to, okay, we're beyond this meet now, let's go to another meet. Or like you said, looking at other programs that you admire, and, well, where are they going? I know I did that with my team in the past. Of started realizing, like, at certain meets, I was like, wait a minute, the top teams aren't coming to this meet, we need to go where they're going. And I think there's something to be said for being in a meet that's almost more competitive than state, so that when you get to state, you're like, well, hey, we've been in a more competitive race than this. Yeah, it's the
yeah,
state meet, and there's that state meet pressure, but still, I think that can be a good mental thing for the runners. And it sounds like you're doing the same thing.
yeah, absolutely. I agree with you.
Yeah. You've already touched on this, but a little bit. But any mentors that have helped you? I know you've mentioned Don Livingston. Um, yeah, but anybody
Yeah.
else
So
that's helped you?
I mentioned we came from California, or from Arizona. And when my son, just right before we came here to Georgia, Roger Bristow coached Buena High School in Arizona, and he had some state champions and had some boys run 9:15 in the 2 mile. And that's really where I started to be like, hey, I think I might want to do coaching. So I was still pretty heavy in the Army with my responsibilities and stuff. But so I started with Roger, who was just a great mentor to me, and what have you. And then when we moved out here to Georgia, I kind of befriended Scott Christensen out of Minnesota, and I actually kind of subscribed to his program and some of his things, because the things that I learned from cross country and track in the 90s were no longer relevant. Just some of those things were, some of the workouts were okay, but the warm-ups and cool downs had drastically changed in terms of what I do now. So Roger Bristow from Arizona, Scott Christensen was a huge mentor to me. And then recently, I started following Jay Johnson out of Boulder, Colorado, and I subscribed and bought his programs because I just wanted to learn to do something different. I felt like my program had kind of gotten stagnant. I was so focused on my son Caleb. Our goal at the time in 21 and 22 was to try to break 9 minutes in the 2 mile. And then after he graduated, I was like, okay, I want to do something different. How can I get more bang for less mileage, so to speak? I wasn't a big fan of high mileage. I was like, how can I? And so that's what led me to Jay Johnson's program. Jay Johnson was all about very elaborate warm-ups that take 15-20 minutes, cool downs that take 15-20 minutes. And I don't mean a 2 mile warm-up and cool down, which was pretty consistent with what I did a few years ago. So we've kind of gotten away from the longer warm-ups and cool downs, but more dynamic type stuff. So Jay Johnson was a huge influence in that. And then recently, I've just started communicating with Doug Souls out of Harriman High School in Utah. He won, and his boys won NXN last fall. And there was a moment where I was gonna move to Utah. I was gonna stop coaching here, and after I graduated, or after I retired from the Army, and I just was like, I'm going to move to Utah and live closer to my sister. So I kind of befriended him and started talking to him. So talking to him has been a great resource for me recently. Within Georgia, a couple coaches, I've mentioned Don Livingston, um, just watching his program and talking to him at various meets. Mike Johnson at McIntosh, getting to know him and talk to him quite a bit. I would say here in Georgia, those two I've talked quite a bit with. Jeremy Frizzle at Whitewater. He's been a great friend. Me and him are texting and sharing information all the time. So I would definitely advocate for new coaches. Don't be shy. Walk up to that team that has some great runners and like, hey, what are you doing? Like, hey, what do you think about this? Me being new to the education system, talking to them about how to deal with administrators, parents, and some cultural things within the team and just pick their brains. Most of the coaches are willing to just talk it up and love to talk about their programs because most coaches are really passionate about what they're doing. So don't be afraid talking to them because they've all helped me tremendously. So
Excellent. Yeah, that's something we're trying to do with the collective of getting coaches talking to each other and sharing their ideas. Because, like you said, most are more than willing to do that because we love this stuff. We're passionate about it, and I'm so glad you mentioned Jay Johnson. I'm a big Jay Johnson fan. In fact, I just went to his clinic out in January. I've never been before, never been to Colorado before, and
yeah.
that was an amazing clinic. Hearing just people from all over the U.S. talk about their programs, and highly recommend that for anybody that has thought about that because his stuff is awesome
Yeah,
for sure.
I agree.
All right, couple more questions. What areas do you feel like you've improved on since you've started coaching?
Yeah, my experience in the Army, pretty aggressive. I'd come out and very detailed, methodical plans, and like you guys just got to follow the plan and what have you. And there's a time where you really got to choose your battles with your athletes, and not be so aggressive, but you can still get the same output and the same outcome. So learning to like take my experiences and what I have personally have gone through and how to share that with the athletes to get that out of them. So I think that just really helps build the culture. So it's just, and there's no cookie cutter system. What I did 5 years ago, probably not going to work now. And then what I've also found is what worked 5 years ago isn't working 2 years ago, but here we are circling back to something I did 5 years ago, whether it was how we did VO2 workouts or how we did hill repeats. It really is on how the kids kind of adapt to some things and what's their temperament and what have you. So one of the biggest things I've learned is learning to be flexible and having options. If you come out with a set plan that you want to do, that's probably not going to always stick. You have to be able to, just switch. Maybe the kid's legs are beat up a little bit and you plan to do hill strides. Well, okay, how about take their shoes off and just let them do 20 seconds in the grass for hills, or for strides in the grass, something that's a little bit easier, what have you. So no cookie cutter programs is like, because like I've talked about how I've followed Scott Christensen, Jay Johnson, and various different guys. If you just try to take their program and say, hey, we're going to follow this to the T, it's not going to work. You got to make it fit not only Georgia in our humidity, which Jay Johnson and Scott Christensen don't have to deal with that up in Minnesota. And so we kind of have what I like to call our poor man's elevation because our heart rate's still 10 to 15 beats higher than, so it's the same thing at their elevation. So I really think adapting that program, not only to Georgia, but then also for us, adapting it to Harris County. We don't have 50, 60 kids on the team cranking, like our number 20 guy on the 5K is probably running 25 minutes as opposed to, Doug Souls, he's got 20 kids under 16, it's not the same environment. So really taking what those pieces of advice are from those higher level coaches and how do I make it fit for Harris County? Just being adaptable and flexible with your athletes and your environment. I think everything matters. Some people think I put way too much emphasis in the details, and I think the details is where I earn the parents' respect, because the parents feel that very individualized training plan for every single individual athlete. Like, if we're supposed to do a threshold today and the kids are supposed to run 7-minute mile pace, but the humidity is 85 degrees, okay, well, maybe you guys run 7:15 today, and be
Mhm.
okay with that. Understand that that is good. Don't feel like oh, I'm not as fast. You're really just trying to take in consideration all the aspects of where we live, our program, the terrain, and all of those things. So being adaptable and flexible is probably the biggest thing I've learned, and nothing's a cookie cutter. So
Oh, I can relate to this so much. This is why I love talking to coaches. I early in my career too, I think I was very much like, oh, this is the plan. We've got to do this. And now yeah, like you, I realize some days like maybe this is more of an effort based workout instead of going after a particular pace. And I'll have to reassure the kids like it's fine because that effort for that pace was there. It just, the clock didn't show it. The watch didn't show it. And then talking about taking something and just putting it, you can't just necessarily transfer it to your program. I did that with a little bit with Jack Daniels. At one point, I was like, I'm just going to apply this to my program and see what happens, and realized quickly like some of what worked for him and his athletes didn't necessarily work for mine, and kind of picked and ended up adapting it to what worked for me. But it was a good lesson. I figured out, okay, I don't necessarily want to do some of that because, like you said, what works for some people and their location might not work for you or your group.
yeah,
So
totally agree.
yeah. All right, last question. What is your opinion of cross country and track in Georgia now?
Um, having come from Arizona and how they do cross country out there, and I came here, and it really do have to adapt to the mentality of Georgia. It really feels like, I mean, we're in the South. This is football, baseball country, um, and cross country was not very popular at Harris County. So I really came into an environment where I wanted to like help apply, at least give an opportunity to athletes that didn't want to play those sports. And so, how does that fit into the greater Georgia cross country network? If you, like we talked about earlier, you go to some of those big meets like Wingfoot and Asics and Carrollton's, orthopedic meet. You know, you see cross country is alive and well in Georgia. It's on there. Um, what could we do that's better? I think more opportunity for different meets. I do feel like the really good meets are very specific. There's only a couple out there, and it's either you either get into those or you're on some, like, so take for instance, if you don't get into Bob Blastow or Coach Wood at the beginning or end of the season, there's not really much other options those same weekends. So getting some other schools to put on just as good a meet so that there's an option for some of the other schools out there, because not everybody can go to those meets. Those meets would be so overcrowded, it just would take away from the environment. So a few more options out there. How do we get there? The schools that are wanting to come along are just going to have to bite the bullet and say, hey, I'm not going to go to Coach Wood, I'm going to go to this meet, or I'm going to put on this meet, and give that other option out there. So other options is probably one of the biggest things. I don't know if I would be ridiculed for this, but I'm not a big fan of Carrollton as the state meet. It's just the way the course goes and how it is, running it around a school campus. I'm a bigger fan of being in open fields, such as like Asics. I think that's a great course to go to. I think like, the McIntosh Preserve, that's a great course that's open. Spectators can zigzag back and forth across the fields and see their athletes. Coaches can get splits, those kinds of things. I don't know if that's worth entertaining, but just meet selections, because one of the things is towards the end of the season, when our kids are finally in really good shape and ready to pop that really good time, we go to Carrollton, and that's the most competitive that our state gets, is right at the state meet. but the time's always going to be off 50 seconds, 45 seconds, just because of how that course is. Um, I don't know how to go about fixing that, but I haven't been in Georgia cross country for long enough to see if there's viable options. I know there's a long history of being at Carrollton, but I do know there's some other great courses out there that are doing great things, such as Stars Mill, the McIntosh Preserve, um, the Chattahoochee eventing for ASICs. Those are just some great courses that are great for spectators and so forth.
I think you bring up a great point about meet options because yeah, there's some meets where yeah, if you don't want to go to that meet, your only other option is maybe out of state because there's no other option that weekend, and it's tough because as a meet host, you want people to come to your meet, and if you're worried, you might be worried about, well, if I put on a meet, is anybody going to go because they're all at this other meet? Um, but I know I've heard some other coaches talking about maybe getting back to the smaller, not necessarily dual meets, but like 5 or 6 teams, but trying to make them competitive. And that might be an alternative to people that don't want to go to the monster meet that weekend.
Yeah.
So that might be an option. Well, thank you so much, Donnie. This has been awesome. Like I said, a lot of respect for your program and what you guys have done, and happy to hear about your experiences with coaching and what you're doing there at Harris County.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Andy. I really appreciate it.
Of course.